I'm here with a crow pose tutorial, bakasana. So this is an arm balance, and I'm gonna give a few tips for getting into it. So if you're not familiar with crow pose, it's hands on the floor, knees to the upper arms, and then shifting weight forward, maybe getting toes off the floor. So a couple things. Hands. Normally, when we have our hands on the floor in yoga, we want fingers really spread and taking weight into the whole hand. So that's how we do it in down dog. But with arm balances, if you've ever seen a circus performer, they have much more of a bend in their hand so that their fingers can be more like steering mechanisms. So I'm just going to show. So rather than really spread, their fingers are a little bit bent, so you can push into your hands. So if you start to fall towards your fingers, you can push into them to help you. You might notice this if you're just balancing on your feet. If you start to fall towards your toes and you can push back into your toes to help you come back, it's the same thing. So with hands on the floor, little bend in the fingers, so you've got some play there. Another thing is, often people just aren't letting their weight get far enough forward. So notice how my elbows right now are behind my wrists. In order to balance, they really have to get right above. Until they're right above, it would be like trying to balance like this. You know, the heavy parts aren't stacked above the base. So if I'm at an angle and trying to balance, it's just not going to happen. So with the elbows back like this, there's no way you're going to get your feet off the floor. Once 100% of the weight is shifted and the elbows are right above the wrists, it's a non-event to lift the toes. You might try this standing. So imagine I've got my weight distributed between my 2 feet and I'm trying to lift 1 foot and I haven't shifted the weight. Even if I shift most of the weight, it's still going to be pretty tricky to get my foot off until it's 100% over in that other foot. Then lifting the toe, not a big deal. So that is how you want it to be in crow. So rather than getting most of the weight and then hopping 100% of the weight, if it's not 100% of the weight, don't even bother taking toes off the floor. You are going quite far forward, so there is a good chance you might fall onto your head. If you want to put a crash pad in front of you to make it a little safer for yourself, that can be useful, but it really is like leaning out over the cliff. Your head is heavy. If you drop it towards the floor, you're much more likely to fall onto it. So you want to lengthen it out and think about going forward. The head has to go far enough forward so that your weight is evenly balanced. So hopefully some of those tips were helpful. You may want to give your wrists a little rub after trying it, or if you can, stand hand is a good wrist release. Now, whenever I'm teaching something that looks like a trick, I want to make sure that we get the context in which we're doing this. So it isn't about getting it. It might feel really exciting to get the toes off the floor and be able to do the pose and do the trick, and sure, there's a part of us that's like, oh, look, I'm doing it. I've actually had a lot of students shout out, look, I'm doing it. It is very exciting. But what's the point of all this? So it's not really about getting it. It's about putting ourselves in this position that's quite challenging. It's scary. And while you're doing that, can you maintain your breath? Can you open and relax your face? Can you really feel what you're doing while you're doing something that's extremely challenging or impossible? So it really doesn't matter if you get the toes on or off the floor. It's a process, and then when you're in that process, is it possible to feel what you're doing fully? So maybe try it one more time and give your wrists a little release, and hopefully this was helpful.